My name is Juliana McBride. For years, I've been a financial consultant, a woman who breathes logic and lives by the precision of a contract. But no professional negotiation ever prepared me for the systematic shredding of my dignity that came with being a Willis. The engagement gala for Parker Willis and Devora was a masterclass in cruelty. The ballroom was a cage of gold leaf and judgment. As I walked in beside my husband, Michael, I felt the atmospheric shift, the way the elite crowd parted not to welcome me, but to isolate me. There was no seat for me at the family table. I was treated like a ghost who had overstayed her welcome. Devora stood at the center of the room in silver silk, her eyes locking onto mine with a predatory gleam. "We must thank everyone for coming," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "From our distinguished board members to those more modest additions to our family, who remind us every day just how much we've had to overlook to maintain our peace." The room erupted. It wasn't just a chuckle, it was a roar of collective superiority. I stood there, my face burning, a navy dress my mother-in-law had called bravely simple. But then a heavy, warm weight pressed against my thigh. Sifra, the family's Labrador, had slipped away from the staff and found me. She didn't bark, she simply sat on my foot, her golden fur a bright contrast against the dark floor. She looked up at Devora and let out a single sharp huff, a sound of pure canine dismissal. Sifra was the only one who didn't see a charity case. She saw a leader. As I scratched her ears, my shame crystallized into a cold, hard diamond of resolve. I met Michael in grad school. He was the gentle Willis. I thought I'd found a partner. I didn't realize I'd found a cage. The ridicule started early. At our first dinner, Angelina commented on my sturdy hands. "I suppose that comes from manual labor, dear. It's so rustic." The table laughed while Michael stared at his wine. But Devora was the architect of my misery. She delighted in pointing out my flaws. Once, she intentionally tripped me in front of investors, then sighed, "Oh, Juliana, you really must learn to walk in heels if you're going to represent us." The whispers that followed were like shards of glass. But I endured it because I was observing. My eyes, trained to find discrepancies in million-dollar funds, were now focused on them. I saw the way Devora's family was secretly funneling Willis assets into private shells. Late one night, I overheard her in the library. "The wedding has to happen. Once I have the voting rights, we strip the company, leave the middle-class wife with the crumbs, and move to Geneva. Michael won't stop us. He's too weak to even defend his own wife." My heart hammered. Sifra, who had been sleeping by the door, stood up and growled, a low, vibrating warning that echoed in my own chest. They weren't just mocking me, they were planning to erase me. I stayed quiet. I let them laugh at my shoes and my rustic ways. But in the dark, with Sifra at my side, I began building a dossier that would turn their perfect lives into a public execution of reputation. And ready to see Juliana and her golden sentinel audit the Willis empire until there's nothing left but debt and regret, hit that like button. The morning after the gala, the Willis mansion felt more like a crypt than a home. I planted myself in the breakfast nook, staring at a spreadsheet on my laptop, watching my own reflection warp in the silver teapot. Across from me, Michael hid behind the Wall Street Journal. He hadn't looked at me since Devora turned me into a punchline. "Michael," I tried, barely a whisper, "about last night." He didn't let me finish. "Juliana, please," he said, his voice clipped. "It was just a joke. You'll need tougher skin around here. Don't make a thing out of it." A thing. As if being shredded in public was a passing irritation. Something brushed my knee. Sifra, our retriever, nestled her head on my lap and let out a low, honest growl. That dog pegged Michael as a coward long before I was ready to see it. I slipped out the French doors into the garden, Sifra at my heel. Once we cleared the security cameras, she veered toward the stone gazebo, the spot where Parker and Devora loved to hide for their private calls. Sifra stopped at a loose stone and started digging with purpose. In less than a minute, she dragged out a scuffed leather folio, hand-written ledgers, sloppy, old-school records. I knelt, heart thumping. Parker wasn't just managing logistics, he was siphoning money from the family charitable trust to cover Devorah's debts in Boston. "Good girl," I whispered, tucking the folio under my sweater. Sifra licked my hand, her tail tapping a steady beat. She wasn't just loyal, she was the only investigator I trusted. At lunch, I wore exactly what Angelina expected: vanilla camouflage. I sat quietly as Abraham Barnett droned about a merger. Then Devorah decided to go in for the kill. Juliana, still busy with that little consulting gig, audited any lemonade stands lately. The table laughed. Even Michael half smiled, his eyes down. I set my glass down, slow and deliberate, catching Sifra's gaze under the table. "Actually," I said, my voice calm, "I've been looking into invisible assets. Funny how much you can hide if you know where to look, and how simple it is to dig them up." For the briefest second, Devorah's grin faltered. Parker stopped with his fork halfway to his mouth. "How metaphorical," Angelina sniffed. I glanced at Sierra, the ignored 22-year-old on the balcony, and saw a spark of hope. The family thought they owned all the secrets. They didn't realize that sometimes all it takes is a good dog to find the buried ones. For the first time in this house, I was finally breathing easy. The minimalist piano is joined by a deep, pulsing cello, dark and driving. The sound of a page turning in a leather ledger and the sharp, sudden bark of a dog standing his ground echo into tense silence. The weekend at the Willis estate was a masterclass in polite exclusion. Abraham Barnett was the guest of honor, a man with a net worth that could stabilize a country. As we sat for Sunday brunch, the hierarchy was clear. The men talked strategy, the women talked society, and I was the scenery. "Juliana, dear," Angelina said, her voice cutting through the air, "I told Abraham you might be interested in his gallery opening, though I suppose contemporary art is a bit loud for your tastes. You prefer things that blend into the beige." Devorah didn't even look up from her mimosa. "Now, Angelina, don't be harsh. Some people are born to be the canvas, not the masterpiece. Juliana is excellent at being invisible." The table chuckled. Michael reached for the toast, his eyes carefully avoiding mine. He was the gentle husband until it came time to stand up to his mother. But Sifra was there. At the sound of Devorah's laugh, the Labrador stood up. She didn't bark, she simply walked over and nudged Devorah's arm, hard. The mimosa splashed, an orange stain blooming across Devorah's white silk. "Ugh, get this beast away from me," Devorah shrieked. "She's ruined my dress." "She's just being friendly, Devorah," I said, my voice as cool as the morning dew. I patted Sifra's head. "She has a sixth sense for tension. Maybe she just thought you looked a bit thirsty for attention." The silence that followed was delicious. Even Abraham Barnett raised an eyebrow in amusement. I led Sifra toward the wooded edge of the estate. Once the house was a gray silhouette, I pulled out the folio. I wasn't just looking for numbers, I was looking for the ridicule I could return in kind. Inside the back flap, I found emails between Devorah and a consultant named Eric. They were planning to move the Willis family private art collection to a vault in Singapore right before the merger. Devorah wasn't just marrying in for the name, she was robbing them blind before she even signed the license. "They think I'm the canvas, Sifra," I whispered, "but I'm the one holding the brush, and I'm about to paint a very ugly picture." As we walked back, we ran into Sierra, smoking a cigarette she wasn't supposed to have. Her eyes lingered on the folio peeking from my jacket. "They're going to eat you alive if you stay here, Juliana," Sierra said. "This family doesn't do partners, they do possessions." "I know," I replied,
but possessions can be very difficult to get rid of when they know where the bodies are buried. Sierra let out a short, sharp laugh. Is that what's in the book? The bodies? Something like that, I told her. I realized then that the simple wife was no longer alone. I had a dog who could find the truth and a sister-in-law who was tired of the lies. The Willis family had spent years making me a joke. Now I was going to make them a cautionary tale. The plucked strings accelerated into a driving, percussive beat, sounding like a ticking clock or a heart racing. The sound of a match being struck and the low, satisfied hoof of a dog settling into the grass fade into a heavy silence.
The atmosphere in the Willis mansion shifted from cold to clinical. Following the mimosa incident, Devora spent 2 days in an icy fury, demanding the dog be rehomed. They thought I was nursing my wounds in the sunroom. Instead, I was using the biometric override Michael had lazily programmed for me. He never imagined I would be the emergency. The Willis family vault wasn't just for jewelry. It was a sanctuary for the private collection Angelina boasted about. I slipped inside, the heavy steel door clicking shut like a guillotine. Sifra waited outside, her ears pricked, my early warning system. I moved past the emeralds to the back crates. These were the Renaissance pieces Abraham Barnett expected to see as merger collateral. I pried open a crate marked La Architectura. Empty. Every single one had been replaced with high-resolution digital prints on aged canvas. Devora wasn't just skimming. She was gutting the family's legacy before she even had the ring on her finger. A sharp, urgent scratch sounded against the vault door. Sifra. I slipped out, heart hammering, just as Angelina rounded the corner. "Juliana, what are you doing in the gallery wing?" she asked, her eyes narrowed with sharpened suspicion. Sifra thought she heard something, I said, my voice remarkably steady. She's been restless. Perhaps it's the invisible assets I mentioned. Even animals can smell a rot in the house. Angelina's face tightened. For the first time, she looked uncertain. "Don't be absurd. Go back to bed." As I retreated, I saw a light under the library door. "The shipment to Singapore is confirmed for Friday," I heard Parker whisper. "Once Barnett signs, the audit won't happen for 30 days. By then, the Willis name will be his problem." "And Juliana?" Devora's voice was like a cold wind. "She's becoming a liability." "Don't worry about her," Parker scoffed. "She's a middle-class consultant who thinks a spreadsheet is a weapon. She has no power. We'll cut her loose the moment the ink is dry. She can go back to Ohio and tell her father how she failed to be a Willis." I stood in the dark hallway, stroking Sifra's fur. They still saw me as a joke. They were so busy watching the front door for rivals that they never noticed the wolf they had invited into their own kitchen. Friday was the merger signing, the day the Willis family expected to be saved. I looked down at Sifra. "Let them plan their exit," I whispered. "I'm planning the ending." The mechanical hum rises to a dissonant, screeching pitch before snapping into absolute silence. The sound of a heavy leash snapping onto a collar and the low, determined breathing of a dog ready for a hunt fade into the dark. The week leading up to the merger felt like the slow pull of a bowstring. Michael smelled of expensive scotch and desperation. Parker and Devora were a whirlwind of frantic elegance, finalizing seating charts as if they were planning a coronation rather than a corporate funeral. I spent my afternoons in the library, the one room they assumed I used only for light reading. In reality, I was cross-referencing the shipping manifests Sifra had helped me audit with the private insurance policies. "Juliana," a voice rasped. I didn't jump. I looked up at Sierra. She looked haggard, the rebellious spark in her eyes replaced by a weary hollow. "They're moving the final crates tonight," she whispered. "It's a private contractor from Boston." "Devora's people," I said, my voice level. Sierra's hands shook. "They're leaving Michael to take the fall. They're leaving you to be the face of the scandal."
I looked at Sifra, who let out a soft, mournful whine. She could sense the tectonic plates of this family shifting. "I know," I said, "but they've forgotten one detail. They've spent 3 years treating me like a simple outsider who can't understand their games. If I don't belong to this family, then I have no loyalty to its secrets." That evening at the final dinner, the ridicule reached a fever pitch. Angelina toasted to the new Willis era, her diamonds catching the candlelight. "And to Juliana," Devora said, her smile razor thin. "I've arranged a parting gift, a first-class ticket back to Ohio for Saturday morning. I thought you might want a head start on your modest life." The table erupted in that familiar, jagged laughter. Parker clinked his glass against Michael's, who looked everywhere but at me. "How thoughtful," I replied, my voice slicing through the laughter like a cold blade. "But I think I'll stay. I've grown quite fond of the invisible assets in this house. In fact, I've decided to make them very, very visible." The laughter died a sudden, awkward death. Devora narrowed her eyes. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, standing up, "that some people are fit to sit in the back and watch, but others are the ones who turn off the lights." I whistled softly. Sifra stood up instantly, trotting to my side. We walked out without looking back, leaving the Golden family frozen. Upstairs, I opened my laptop. I didn't send the files to the police. I sent them to Abraham Barnett. If the Willises wanted a merger, I was going to give them one they would never forget.
The day of the signing arrived with a gray, oppressive sky. Abraham Barnett arrived at 10 a.m., flanked by an army of attorneys and a cold, professional silence. Parker and Michael wore their most expensive suits, masks of confidence that looked brittle under the harsh morning light. Devora sat beside Parker, her silver silk dress shimmering, her eyes darting toward the double doors every time they creaked. "Shall we begin?" Abraham asked, his voice like gravel. He didn't look at the champagne, he looked at the contracts. "Of course," Parker said, his voice a pitch too high. "The Willis-Barnett merger is the future of East Coast logistics." I sat in the back, near the heavy velvet curtains, the simple wife in a muted gray dress that blended into the shadows. Sifra lay at my feet, her golden eyes wide open, tracking every movement. "Actually," Abraham said, his pen hovering over the signature line, "I received a very interesting audit late last night regarding the Renaissance collection." The air left the room. Angelina stiffened in her chair, clutching her pearls. "Discrepancies?" Devora laughed like breaking glass. "Abraham, surely you don't listen to anonymous gossip." "Is it?" Abraham pulled a high-resolution photo from his briefcase, the one I had taken inside the vault, "because this looks like a digital print, and the originals are currently in a shipping container destined for Singapore." Parker turned a sickly shade of gray. Michael looked at me with a horrified realization. "Juliana," he whispered. "I told you, Michael," I said, my voice cutting through the panic like a scalpel. "Numbers don't lie, only people do." I stood up and looked directly at Angelina. "You called me a canvas, Angelina, but the canvas is what holds the entire image together." Sifra stood up beside me, a low, protective rumble in her chest. Devora's aristocratic mask finally shattered. "You little bitch," she hissed. "You think you can destroy us? You'll leave this house with a suitcase and a stray dog." "While you," I interrupted, "explain to the FBI why the charitable trust was used to launder money." The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder with every heartbeat. I hadn't just sent the files to Abraham, I had CC'd the authorities.
"I'm not leaving with a suitcase, Devora," I said as the front doors were thrown open. "I'm leaving with my dignity. You're the ones who are about to become the public joke." As the agents moved in, I felt a strange, cold peace. The human ridicule was over. The Willis family spent years trying to make me feel small. Now, as the handcuffs clicked, they looked smaller than I ever had. I whistled for Sifra. She followed me out past the crumbling legacies and into the cool, gray rain. For the first time, the air felt clean.
The Willis mansion was no longer a fortress, it was a crime scene. Blue and red lights pulsed against the white marble columns, turning the symbol of their greatness into a strobe light of scandal. Neighbors, the same elite families who had laughed at me, now stood at the edge of their driveways with binoculars recording the fall of the Willis dynasty. I sat on the tailgate of my SUV at the end of the driveway, the rain misting my hair. Sifra sat beside me, her head swiveling as she watched the agents carry out the gilded mirrors and the crates of Renaissance prints. Michael was the first to be let out. He didn't look like a prince anymore. He looked like a man who had finally realized that being gentle was just another word for being a bystander. "Juliana," he croaked, "I didn't know about the Singapore accounts. I thought we were just protecting the legacy." "That's the problem, Michael," I said, my voice steady. "You were so busy making sure I didn't embarrass the family that you never noticed your own brother was selling your soul for parts." He looked at Sifra, then back at me before the agents nudged him toward the car. Then came Angelina. She walked with her chin up, her pearls still in place, but her eyes were hollow. "You think you've won, Juliana. You've destroyed a name that took a century to build. You'll be remembered as the traitor who bit the hand that fed her." "The hand that fed me was biting me first, Angelina. A name is just a label on an empty box. I just showed the world it was hollow." Finally, Devora appeared. Her silver silk dress was stained and wrinkled. She looked at me with a hatred so pure it felt physical. "I'll find you, Juliana. I'll make sure no firm ever hires a consultant with your face again." "I'm not worried, Devora. I hear the federal prison system is in desperate need of your legal expertise. You'll fit right in." As the last car pulled away, the silence returned. Sierra walked down the driveway, a single backpack slung over her shoulder. "So," she said, her voice surprisingly light, "what now?" "Now," I said, climbing into the driver's seat and whistling for Sifra, "we go find a place where the air doesn't smell like old money and lies." "Can I come?" Sierra asked. I looked at the girl who had spent her life being the mistake of the Willis family. I nodded. "Get in. Sifra likes the company." I started the engine and drove away, never looking back in the rearview mirror. The ridicule was over. The game was won. And for the first time in 35 years, Juliana Brickbride was exactly who she wanted to be. The highway stretched out before us, a ribbon of wet asphalt cutting through the dark woods. In the back seat, Sifra was curled into a golden ball, her breathing heavy and rhythmic, the only peaceful sound in a car filled with the ghost of the Willis name. Sierra stared out the window, her reflection ghost-like against the glass. "They're going to hate you forever, you know," Sierra said. "Not just for the money, for the fact that you were right." "I don't need their love, Sierra. I needed them to stop using me as a punchline," I replied. I pulled into a nondescript diner, the kind of place Angelina would have called a biohazard. As we sat in a vinyl booth, Sifra tucked under the table, I opened my laptop one last time. The news was already breaking. The Willis fall, luxury, larceny, and the Labrador. The media was obsessed with the insider wife. They painted me as a vengeful genius, but I knew the truth. I was just a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for her own intelligence.
Then my phone buzzed. An unknown number. Abraham Barnett. "Juliana," his gravelly voice said, "the feds are tearing the accounts apart, but I noticed something in the files. A subledger for a property in Ohio. A farmhouse." My heart stuttered. "My parents' house?" "No," Barnett said. "A property Michael bought in your name 3 years ago. The deed is clear. It's yours, Juliana, untouchable by the courts." I looked down at Sifra. She nudged my knee, her tail giving a single, knowing thump against the floor. "He was protecting me," I whispered. "In his own cowardly, quiet way, he was building me a way out." "He might be a Willis," Barnett said, "but even a wolf can have a moment of clarity. What are you going to do with it?" I looked at Sierra, watching me with wide, hopeful eyes. I looked at the screen, where Devorah's mugshot was the top trending image in the country. The ridicule had flipped. The golden girl was the joke now. "I'm going to live," I said firmly, "without a script, without a seat at someone else's table." I hung up and looked at my sister-in-law. "Finish your fries, Sierra. We're going to Ohio. I think Sifra would like the open fields." As we walked out into the cool night air, the weight of the Willis family finally fell away. I wasn't the simple wife or the consultant. I was just Juliana, and for the first time, that was more than enough.
The state line felt like a physical weight lifting off the roof of the car. As the neon signs of New York faded into the dark silhouettes of the Ohio countryside, the air began to smell different. Damp earth, harvested corn, and the honest chill of a place that didn't care about your last name. I pulled into the gravel driveway of the farmhouse. It wasn't a mansion. It was a sprawling, white-clad home with a wraparound porch and a red barn that had seen better decades. Sifra didn't wait for a command. The moment I opened the door, she leaped out, her paws crunching on the gravel. She ran a joyful circuit around the perimeter, her golden fur a streak of light in the moonlight. "He really bought this," Sierra whispered. "Michael? The guy who complained if the hotel sheets weren't 800 thread count?" "Maybe he knew," I said, looking at the darkened windows. "Maybe he knew he wasn't strong enough to leave, so he built a lifeboat for the only person who was." I found the key hidden under a rusted cast iron bell by the back door. Inside, the house smelled of cedar and floor wax. No marble, no gold leaf, just sturdy oak and soft wool. I sat at the kitchen table, my phone buzzing on the counter. A news alert. Parker Willis and Devorah McBride denied bail. Potential 20-year sentence. The woman who ridiculed my roots was sitting in a $5 jumpsuit. The circle was complete. The world was laughing at her now. "Juliana?" Sierra called. "There's the box here." Inside a wooden crate was a stack of financial journals, a set of high-end binoculars, and a note in Michael's neat script. "For the consultant who saw everything I tried to hide, you were always too big for that house, Juliana. The view from the porch is better than the view from the ballroom." I felt a lump in my throat. Michael hadn't fought for me in the room, but he had fought for me in the shadows. It didn't excuse his silence, but it made the victory taste less like ash. Sifra came trotting in, a dusty tennis ball clamped in her jaws. She dropped it at my feet, her tail wagging with a slow, rhythmic thud. "You knew all along, didn't you?" I whispered. She let out a soft huff. In the Willis mansion, she was a guard dog. Here, she was just a dog, and I was just a woman with a clean slate and a farmhouse the FBI couldn't touch. "Tomorrow, we start over," I said to Sierra. "No more Willis logistics, no more golden brides." "What are we then?" Sierra asked. I looked at the open fields. "We're the ones who got away." Life in Ohio was supposed to be silent. No clicking heels on marble, no whispered barbs over crystal flutes. For 2 weeks, the only sounds were the wind through the cornstalks and the steady, rhythmic thump-thump of Sifra's tail against the porch's wooden planks. We were finally breathing. But a Willis shadow is long. I was in the kitchen, scrolling through a local job board when Sifra suddenly stood up. Her ears weren't just perked, they were pinned back. A low, vibrating growl started in her chest, a sound I hadn't heard since the night in the vault. "Sifra, what is it?" She didn't look at me. She stared at the driveway. A black sedan, polished to a garish shine, pulled up to the farmhouse. I stepped onto the porch, my hand resting on Sifra's collar. The driver's door opened. It wasn't a Fed, and it wasn't Michael. It was Abraham Barnett. "Beautiful property," he said. "What are you doing here, Abraham?" I asked, my voice as hard as the winter. "The game is over." "The game never ends, Juliana. It just changes boards." He walked toward the porch, stopping when Sifra let out a sharp, warning bark. "I'm here because the feds found something in Parker's private server, something even you missed." I felt a chill. "Parker wasn't just stealing," Barnett said. "He was being blackmailed. Someone has been bleeding the Willis group dry for 5 years. "Who?" I asked, gripping the railing. Barnett looked at the house. "The signatures on the blackmail accounts, they lead back to a maiden name, Angelina's maiden name." The world tilted. The woman who ridiculed my humble origins, who preached about the Willis legacy, had been the one gutting it from the inside out. She had been holding the matches while blaming me for the smoke. "She used you, Juliana," Barnett whispered. "She wanted you to blow the whistle so Parker and Devora would take the fall, leaving her with the hidden millions." Sifra let out a low whine and nudged my hand. She had known. She had always growled at Angelina, even when the woman was being pleasant. The ridicule hadn't been a personality trait, it had been a tactical diversion. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because the feds can't find the last 10 million, Barnett said, "and I have a feeling that if anyone knows how to find a hidden treasure in a field of lies, it's the woman who survived the Willis ballroom." I looked down at Sifra. The game was calling me back, but this time I wasn't the pawn. I was the hunter.
Barnett's words hung in the crisp Ohio air like the scent of ozone before a lightning strike. Angelina, the woman who had spent 3 years treating me like a smudge on her fine china, had been the one shattering the plates all along. She was playing the betrayed mother perfectly under house arrest. "She's not a victim," I said, my voice low. "She's the architect." I looked at Sifra. The Labrador was pacing the porch, her nose twitching. She stopped, looked at Barnett's black car, and let out a sharp bark, not at him, but at the trunk. Barnett popped the lid, revealing boxes of Angelina's discarded stationery and old leather planners. Sifra didn't hesitate. She dove into a box and emerged with a silk-lined jewelry pouch tucked into the spine of a vintage diary. Inside wasn't a diamond. It was a silver whistle, antique and engraved with a crest I didn't recognize. "That's the crest of the Barnett shipping partners from 40 years ago," Sierra whispered, walking up from the barn. I looked at Abraham. His face had gone remarkably pale. "My father and Angelina were close once," he muttered. "History is never ancient in this family, Abraham," I said, spinning the whistle. "It's just buried." Sifra nudged my leg, her eyes fixed on the silver. I realized then, Sifra hadn't just been a family pet Michael bought. She belonged to someone else first. "Where did Michael get Sifra, Abraham?" I asked. "He found her at a rescue," Barnett said, too quickly. "Liar." I stepped closer. "She's a trained scent hound, and she reacts to this whistle like it's her master's voice." I blew a short, silent burst. Sifra didn't sit. She ran straight to the red barn and began scratching frantically at a floorboard near the tractor. Sierra and I pried up the board. Beneath it sat a fireproof safe, bolted to the foundation long before this house was bought for me. "The 10 million isn't in Singapore," I whispered, my blood chilling. "It's under our feet. Angelina didn't buy this place for my safety. She bought it as her private vault, and she used Michael to move me to Ohio as her unwitting guard." The twist was tightening. Angelina hadn't just ridiculed me to hide her crimes. She moved me to Ohio because she thought I was too simple to look under the floorboards. I looked back at the porch. Barnett wasn't moving. He was just watching. "You were never Michael's dog, were you, Sifra?" I whispered. The Labrador sat, looking at the safe with a weary, knowing gaze. She had been sent to watch the money, but she had chosen to watch me instead.
The silence in the barn was deafening. Abraham Barnett stood in the doorway, his silhouette blocking the afternoon sun, casting a long, jagged shadow over the pried-up floorboards. He wasn't reaching for a weapon, but his stillness was more threatening than any move he could have made. "You were always too good at your job, Juliana," Barnett said, dropping the gravelly charm. "That's why Angelina chose you. She needed someone who could see the threads but was too distracted by the family's cruelty to pull them." I stood up, the silver whistle clutched in my palm. Sifra stood between us, her hackles raised, a low tectonic rumble in her chest. "The silence," I whispered, the realization interlocking. It wasn't just to break my spirit, it was a smokescreen. If I was busy defending my dignity, I wouldn't have time to look at the deed. I wouldn't wonder why a dog with elite scent training was being gifted to a consultant. Sierra stepped back toward the tractor. My mother, she used Juliana as a live-in vault guard. "Exactly," Barnett said, taking a slow step forward. "But Angelina's gotten greedy. She's trying to cut me out of the retirement fund we built together." The man who helped me expose the Willises wasn't an ally. He was a rival thief. He hadn't come for closure. He had come to collect. "Get out," I said, my voice as cold as a winter frost. "Be reasonable, Juliana. There's 10 million in that floor. Just give me the code." "I don't have the code, Abraham. I have something better. I have the silver whistle you trained to find it, and I have the eyes of a consultant who can trace your manifests." Suddenly, the high-pitched whine of a drone filled the air outside the barn. "What's that?" Barnett spun around. "I didn't just call you, Abraham," I lied, my heart hammering. "I set an automated trigger. If I don't check in, the GPS coordinates of this farm and your vehicle are sent directly to the SEC. It was a bluff, a desperate gamble based on the fact that Barnett assumed I was as ruthless as he was. Barnett searched for a crack in my porcelain mask. "You really are a Willis, aren't you?" he spat. "You've learned to lie as well as Angelina." "No," I replied. "I'm Juliana McBride, and I'm the one who's ending your story." Barnett looked at Sifra, then at the safe, and finally at the road. With a string of curses, he tore out of the driveway in a cloud of Ohio dust. I sank onto the tractor tire, my legs finally giving way. "Was there really a drone?" Sierra asked. I looked at the sky. Just a neighbor's kid, but in this family, everyone is so afraid of being watched that they see ghosts in every shadow. Sifra rested her heavy head on my lap. She looked at the safe, then at me, and let out a soft huff. The simple wife had outplayed the masters. Now I just had to decide, do I turn the money in, or do I make sure Angelina Willis never sleeps in silk again? The following 48 hours were a blur of cold adrenaline. Sierra and I didn't open the safe immediately. We waited until the dust from Abraham Barnett's departure settled. When the heavy steel finally creaked open, it didn't reveal gold bars. It revealed a neatly organized archive of insurance. "My God," Sierra whispered, her flashlight dancing over rows of microfiche. "These aren't just assets. These are the dirty secrets of half the shipping magnates on the coast. Angelina didn't just steal money. She stole the leverage that kept the Willis name untouchable for 50 years. I picked up a blue leather folder, records of donations to the very judges overseeing Parker's case. Angelina hadn't been hiding from the law. She had been holding it hostage. She used the ridicule against me for a reason, Sierra, I said, my voice tight. She needed me to be the emotional lightning rod. If I was the scorned ex-wife making noise, the feds would see a domestic squabble instead of a corporate coup. Suddenly, Sifra stood up, her ears twitching toward the porch. I walked to the window. A woman sat in a wicker chair, draped in charcoal cashmere that looked absurdly out of place. "I knew you'd find it, Juliana," she said. It was Angelina. I stepped onto the porch, Sifra at my side, her growl a low tectonic warning. "You're supposed to be under house arrest." House arrest is for people who don't own the house next door to the chief of police, she said. "You've done well, Juliana. You've found the nest. Now the question is, are you going to fly away with it or let it pull you down?" "I'm turning it all in, Angelina. Every bribe, every ledger." She let out a dry laugh. "Then what? You'll be a hero for a week, then spend 10 years in depositions. They'll ridicule you until you're just a footnote in a scandal you didn't start." She stood up, her eyes burning. "Or walk away. I have a plane waiting. I'll give you half, Juliana, enough to buy 100 farmhouses and the silence of every person who ever laughed at you." I looked at the woman who had spent years calling me simple. She wasn't offering a partnership, she was offering a prison built on the very lies that destroyed her sons. "I'm not like you," I said. "I don't need to own the room to feel big." Sifra didn't wait for a command. She stepped in front of me, her lip curling back to reveal teeth trained for more than fetching tennis balls. She let out a bark so loud it rattled the windows. Angelina froze. She saw her own failure reflected in Sifra's golden eyes. "The dog was the only thing Michael ever gave me that was honest, and she's the one who's going to walk you to the gate." I pulled out my phone. I didn't call the police. I called Abraham Barnett. "He's 10 minutes away, Angelina, and he's very interested in that retirement fund." The terror on her face was the most satisfying thing I had ever seen. I turned back into the house, closing the door on the ghosts of the Willis family forever. The headlights of Abraham Barnett's car swept across the porch like searchlights, illuminating Angelina in her charcoal cashmere. She looked small, fragile even, standing there as her former partners stepped out. I watched from behind the screen door, my hand resting on Sifra's sturdy neck. "Angelina," Barnett's voice boomed, devoid of charm, "you've got nothing left but a suitcase and a grudge." I didn't stay to listen. I walked back to the kitchen where Sierra was waiting. The safe sat open, its contents a mountain of paper representing 50 years of human misery. "You really sent it?" Sierra whispered. "The digital copies?" "I sent them 30 minutes ago, a scheduled upload. If I didn't hit cancel by midnight, the entire Shadow Empire becomes public record. I didn't hit cancel." The weight of the ridicule was finally lifting. They thought my middle-class morality was a weakness. They never realized it was the very thing that made me untouchable. A sharp tapping sounded at the back door. Sifra had trotted around the house, nudging the handle with her nose. I let her in, and she went straight to the safe. She didn't sniff the papers. She sat on the rug and looked at me, her tail giving a single, final thump. "She knows it's over," Sierra said, a small smile finally touching her lips. Outside, voices escalated, then abruptly cut off as a car door slammed. The red taillights of Barnett's sedan faded into the Ohio mist. Angelina was gone. She was no longer the narrator of my story. I opened my laptop. The news cycle was already shifting. "The Simple Wife Strikes Back: How Juliana McBride Dismantled the Willis Barnett Cartel." I picked up the parting gift Devora had given me, the first-class ticket to Ohio, and slowly, methodically cut it into tiny, confetti-like pieces. "Juliana?" Sierra asked. "What happens to the 10 million?" "The feds will seize the physical assets.
But the whistleblower fee for uncovering 50 years of racketeering, that's going into a trust. For you, for my parents, and for a very large supply of dog treats. I looked at Sifra, who had finally closed her eyes, her head resting on her paws. She had been trained to guard secrets, but she had chosen to guard a person. "The audit is complete," I whispered, "and for the first time, the balance is exactly where it needs to be." I picked up the binoculars Michael left me and walked to the window. The Willis family tried to make me a shadow. Instead, they gave me the power to walk away.